Nobody paid much attention to Elena Vasquez when she walked into a room. She was the kind of woman who moved quietly through the world, not because she was unsure of herself, but because she had learned a long time ago that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most useful one. She was 41 years old, with steady brown eyes and hands that never trembled. She had spent 23 years in the United States Navy as a hospital corpsman, working in places most people never see: forward surgical units in Iraq, naval hospitals in Okinawa and Bahrain, trauma bays that smelled of blood and antiseptic and fear. She had held men's hands as they died, and she had fought to keep others alive. She had seen things that would break most people, and she carried all of it quietly, the way strong people do. By October of 2012, Elena was stationed at Naval Medical Center San Diego, working night shifts in the emergency room. She liked the night shift. It was calmer in some ways, even when it wasn't calm at all. The hallways were quieter, the fluorescent lights buzzed a little less impatiently, and the people who worked those hours tended to be serious people, not here to be seen, but here to work. Not everyone, though. Dr. Marcus Holt had arrived at the department 3 months earlier as a third-year resident. He was 30 years old, tall, and confident in the way that some young doctors are before life has taught them humility. He was not a bad doctor, he was actually quite good. But he had a way of filling a room with his voice and his certainty that made some of the quieter staff feel invisible. He once asked a colleague, in front of Elena and several other nurses, whether that quiet one ever actually had anything to say, or whether she just stood there like furniture. Elena had not reacted. She had looked at the patient in front of her, checked his IV line, and written something in his chart. She did not hold grudges. She did not waste time on people who underestimated her. She had learned that the best response to being ignored was simply to be ready for the moment when it mattered. That moment came on the night of October 14th. The call came in at 11:47 in the evening. A military transport vehicle had rolled over on Interstate 5 during a return from a training convoy. 16 Marines from Camp Pendleton. Multiple injuries, 12 minutes out. The emergency room shifted into a different gear, the kind of controlled urgency that good trauma teams move with, where everyone knows their job and the noise is purposeful. Dr. Holt took charge of the incoming response. He was good at this part, commanding, decisive, efficient. The team responded to him well. Elena stationed herself near the ambulance bay and said nothing. She simply watched. That was what she always did first. She watched. The first vehicles arrived, and the team moved fast. Fractures, lacerations, one serious spinal injury that needed immediate attention. Elena worked without being asked, inserting IV lines, checking vitals, marking charts, moving from one stretcher to the next with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She did not call attention to herself. She did not need to. Then the third vehicle pulled up, and everything changed. There were 4 Marines inside, all in serious condition. The worst of them was Sergeant David Okafor, 26 years old, from Augusta, Georgia. He was conscious, but barely. His blood pressure was dropping fast. His breathing was labored and uneven. He looked at the ceiling above him with the glazed, faraway expression of a man whose body is losing a fight. Dr. Holt assessed him quickly and called it attention pneumothorax on the left side. This is a condition where air gets trapped in the chest cavity and begins pressing on the heart and lungs, and it can kill a person within minutes if it is not treated. The treatment is a needle inserted into the chest to release the pressure. Holt reached for the equipment and began preparing to insert it on the left. Elena stood on the right side of the stretcher. She placed 2 fingers gently at the side of Sergeant Okafor's neck. She watched the way his chest rose, or rather, the way it did not rise evenly. She looked at the position of his trachea, the hollow tube at the front of his throat. She noticed something small, something that most people in the room, in the noise and the rush and the pressure of the moment, had not seen. She put her hand on Dr. Holt's arm. He stopped and looked at her. The room went quiet for just a second, that rare, suspended second when everything holds its breath. Elena shook her head. Then she pointed. Not left, right. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply pointed, and in her eyes was a certainty so complete that it stopped the room cold. Holt stared at her. He had 2 seconds to make a decision. Trust 23 years of experience standing silently on the other side of the stretcher, or trust his own initial read. The seconds ticked. Sergeant Okafor's blood pressure continued to drop. Holt redirected to the right side. The needle went in. There was a rush of air, the unmistakable sound of pressure releasing where it had been trapped. Within moments, Sergeant Okafor's breathing eased. His blood pressure began to climb back toward something stable. The color slowly returned to his face. He was going to live. Later, the attending physician who reviewed the case would explain in the debrief that Elena had identified a mirror image presentation, the kind where the body's signs point in the opposite direction from what a standard assessment would suggest. It is rare. It requires a level of observational skill that is not taught in a classroom. It is built only through years of watching patients, of knowing the difference between what the textbook says and what the human body in front of you is actually doing. Had Holt proceeded with the left-sided insertion, it would have done nothing for Sergeant Okafor. The seconds lost might have cost him his life. Elena returned to her work. She moved through the remaining patients with the same steady focus, identifying a sign of internal bleeding in a Marine who had already been cleared, flagging early symptoms of brain injury in 2 others. She did not pause to explain herself. She did not seek anyone's approval. She simply kept going until every patient was stable. By 2 in the morning, all 16 Marines were alive. The debrief was held the following afternoon. Dr. Holt stood at the front of the room and walked through the events of the night in careful clinical detail. He described the challenge of the mass casualty situation, the speed of the decisions, the performance of the team. He credited team observation for the corrected assessment of Sergeant Okafor. He did not say Elena's name. She sat in the 3rd row and took notes. When Dana Ferris, the charge nurse and her closest colleague in the department, caught her eye afterward and raised an eyebrow, Elena offered only a small, quiet shrug. She was not angry. She was not hurt, or at least she did not show it. She had not done what she did for recognition. She had done it because a young man from Augusta, Georgia, was dying, and she knew what to do. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the department. Slowly, almost invisibly, the way light changes in a room as afternoon becomes evening. The residents who had been in that trauma bay began treating Elena differently. They became quieter when she was charting nearby. They started glancing toward her during complicated cases. A few asked her questions they had never thought to ask before. Not the easy questions, but the real ones, the kind that come from genuine respect. Dr. Holt found her one afternoon in December in the break room. She was sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a half-finished crossword puzzle. He sat down across from her and did not say anything for a long moment. "I almost didn't listen to you," he said finally. "I know," she said. He looked at the table. "In the debrief, I should have named you. I didn't, and I should have." Elena looked at him steadily. There was no anger in her expression, and no performance of forgiveness either. Just honesty. "The Marines are alive," she said. "That's the only name that matters." She picked up her crossword and went back to the floor. 6 months later, a letter arrived at the nursing administration office. It was addressed simply to the quiet nurse in the ER, October 14th. Sergeant David Okafor had written it himself. He had spent weeks after his discharge trying to find out who had made the call that night, who had seen what others missed, who had stepped in without hesitation and without a word. He had asked nurses, he had asked his attending physician, he had made calls that led him eventually to Dana Ferris, who told him the truth. The letter was 4 pages long, and it had 16 signatures on it. Each Marine had written a paragraph about his life, as it stood in April of 2013. One was still serving, about to be promoted. One was finishing his GED and planning to start college. One had just become a father, a baby girl, born in February, who he had named after his grandmother. One had decided, after everything, to become a paramedic. The youngest in the group, barely 20 years old, wrote that he had called his mother the night after his discharge and told her things he had never said out loud before. He said he had time to say them because of her. Every paragraph ended the same way. Because of her. 16 men, 16 different lives, continuing forward, all of them pointing back to a woman who had stood quietly beside a stretcher and refused to let a young sergeant from Augusta, Georgia, become a statistic. The letter was framed and hung in the nurses' station the following week. Elena asked, twice, for it to be taken down. She was outvoted both times. Her colleagues were not willing to let that particular piece of truth be put away in a drawer. Elena Vasquez retired from the United States Navy in 2015, after 26 years of service. At her retirement ceremony, Dana Ferris gave the address. She spoke about what it means to be the kind of person who does not need to be noticed in order to do the work, the kind of person who is not performing competence, but simply living it. She spoke about a night in October 2012, and a man named Okafor, and a choice made in 2 seconds. Elena sat in the front row in her dress whites and looked at the floor the way she always did when people were talking about her. When the applause came, she nodded once and pressed her lips together, the expression of someone who has spent a lifetime being more comfortable giving than receiving. After the ceremony, a young corpsman found her at the reception. She was barely 19, just out of training, nervous in the way that new people are when they are standing near someone whose story has already traveled ahead of them. She asked Elena what the most important thing she had learned in 26 years was. Elena thought about it, not for long, because she had always known the answer. She had just never been asked before. Pay attention, she said, not to how the room sees you, to the patient in front of you. The young corpsman wrote it down in the small notebook she carried in her breast pocket. That evening, scattered across the country, 16 men went home to their families. One sat on a back porch in Augusta and watched his daughters play in the yard until the light disappeared. One ate dinner with his mother for the first time in 3 years. One held his baby girl and did not put her down for an hour. None of them had forgotten the nurse whose name they had to search for, in the quiet after everything was over, because she had never thought to introduce herself. They never forgot her. They never would.